Welcome to Fragmented, a software developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better developers. My name's Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show. This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by AndroidJobs.io. On Android Jobs, you can post a job posting for free and also sign up to get weekly notification emails of new job postings. These job postings are worldwide, so any company around the world can post for free. However, I wanted to let you know about a couple of feature upgrades that we recently made to the site. Number one, you can now pay for a upgraded highlighted post, and this will highlight your job post among all the other Android jobs that are out there. Number two, you can pay for a featured job posting that will highlight it as well as pin it to the top of the job board. Now, again, the free job postings are still available, so you can still post a job for free, but if you would like to kind of give it a little bit more flair, you can upgrade it as you'd like. Now, additionally, every job posting on Android Jobs, including the free one, is now going to be a 90-day job posting. So please check it out when you have a chance. Sign up to get notified of new job postings. And thanks for listening and checking out the site. Again, that's AndroidJobs.io. Kaushik, we are back again. How are you doing?
Doing good. The weather's been a little gloomy. I hear you've been getting a little snow up, on your side.
Yeah, I got a little flurries going on right now outside the window. It's pretty. It's nice outside, but spring is coming though. But that's good that you've got some. I hear you got some wet weather over there. You guys have been through a drought for quite a while, right?
Yeah, California's been through a drought, but we're getting a lot of water. Last 2 weeks. It's been, and I always see this every time there's a heavy rain. They're like, oh, if this continues for the next 2 weeks, then California will finally be out of a drought. Or that is the usual saying. I don't buy it though.
It's weird. I'm from Northern California too. So I'm originally, for the California-based listeners or anyone in the world, if you know where San Francisco's at on the map, I'm actually from 3 hours north of San Francisco. So I'm very familiar with all of those reservoirs up there. And there was, when we'd have times like you're having, when it would just rain and rain and rain, I remember the lakes, the reservoirs would be so low, people would be freaking out, and they would climb hundreds of feet, within a few weeks. It was just crazy how fast these lakes would fill up when you just have torrential downpours. So hopefully you guys are full and good to go.
That we are. And hopefully the water problem is solved, but the rain sometimes does put a damper. It's not like you can go out or do anything.
And San Francisco's our San Francisco area is always cold as it is and kind of foggy. So it's putting even more of a damper on it. But hey, that's why we're here with the podcast. Hopefully spark some excitement in everyone else's day.
Yeah. So I got a nice warm cup of chai/tea with me here and, I'm ready to talk.
Excellent. Yeah. I was just finishing up some mushroom coffee here. So.
Oh, mushroom coffee. I've heard of that. I've heard of those. At some point we should talk about it.
Yeah. The Four Sigmatic is the one I'm drinking. Anyway, yeah, we'll go into another time. But until then, we've got an interesting topic that you are bringing to the table. So what do we talk about today?
Yeah, I think with spring, there's a whole bunch of topics we wanted to talk about. But today there was one that was really pressing. Have you used Google Java format before?
Yes. Yeah. Many times. Yeah.
Yeah. So Google Java format is this, it's not a linter, it's a code style program, so to speak, that basically reformats all your source code to comply with a very specific style, right? And I think it's called Google Java style. I loved this tool in the Java days because it was opinionated and it would just format your code, no questions asked, right? There's no two ways. There wasn't if you configure it this way, then you can do X, but if you configure it Y, you have to do this. It requires a bunch of initialization to make sure that your baseline, none of that. It's, you use Google Java format. Google has, to its best of its knowledge, chosen a code style that works for the Google code base.
Yeah.
Run it through your Java, works great. Yeah. For the longest time, people have been looking, I think even in the podcast we mentioned this, we've been looking for a replacement for that. There wasn't exactly a replacement, but there was this tool called ktfmt, which is probably what most people have used. And do you use ktfmt by any chance?
I have, yes. I'll just leave it at that. Yes, I've.
Right, because ktfmt was great, but I think, in my opinion, what it tried to do was a whole bunch of things, right? It took care of code style, but it would also talk about linting, errors, and it would have a whole mishmash of different functionality, right?
Mhm.
For better or worse. I could never get KT-lint to just work like Google Java format, which is like no questions asked, just do this, get it done, move on, right?
Mhm.
And the more and more like I find that I'm reviewing PRs or MRs or like whatever, right? Sometimes every time I see someone say, hey, and by the way, I think you got like 2 spaces in there, or like, hey, this thing is formatted by 2 spaces. You could get KT-lint to flag a warning, so then your CI would throw a warning, or it would like, depending on how strict you are, you could get a failure to pop up. But that was always frustrating. And like recently, I've been trying to revive this open source project called TrueTime that I built. I think we talked about it at a previous episode too. And I've converted the entire thing to Kotlin and coroutines and like all that good stuff. Again, future topic, for a future episode. But one of the things that bugged me, I was like, okay, how much have things changed, right? Like, can I go and find this tool? And Facebook, or I should say Meta, I suppose, came up with this tool. It's been a few years, actually. I don't think it's very recent.
Really? I didn't even know.
Yeah, it's called ktfmt. So KT format. KT for Kotlin, FMT for format. And there's actually this blog post. I'll make sure, we try to add that in the show notes.
Okay.
That talks about how when Facebook migrated over to Kotlin, I think even the title of the blog post is like, oh, this is how Meta migrated millions of lines of code, or something along those lines. And they wanted a very similar thing, which is like, hey, can we just get Google Java format, but for Kotlin, make it simple, make it straightforward, no fanciness. And so they did. And I think it made the news about 2 years back, but I think it was still like not necessarily just there. And so that's why I think it didn't necessarily get as much attention as I think it should. Because today, like, it actually works really well. And so I want to talk to you because I actually added it to my open source repo and like some of the code bases that we work here at Instacart. And it's been working out great.
Yeah, you brought this topic up to me, and I found it interesting because I've used KT-lint, and then I also use detect for static analysis stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I use them both because KT-lint will kind of do some formatting, but then it also does some linting, and there's some overlap, I guess you could say, between that and detect a little bit. But I never really I really like detect. Like, I like it because it's helping me write better code. Like, all right, I got cyclomatic complexity. I've got too many if statements, or whatever. The file's too big. It's just helping overall. And so I never really felt that way about KT-lint. Now, that's not to say it's not a useful tool. It's just, it never really struck me as like, I really like this thing. And the thing that I've always wanted was some type of formatter. And when you told me ktfmt, I looked at the website and there's a few screenshots here. And that was immediately what sold me. I was like, oh, yes, that's what I want.
Yeah. I mean, their blog post talks about it, but they talk that, hey, they say that ktfmt is a deterministic Kotlin formatter based on the code and philosophy of Google Java format, right? Okay. So that's pretty much what ktfmt is. Detect is also pretty good. I will say ktfmt is not a static analysis tool necessarily. It's just a formatter.
Yeah, and that's what I want, because I want to leave all the static analysis. I'll leave that to detect. And that's I didn't explain that well enough. That one of the issues that I've had with a lot of tools that are out there, and I think KT-lint falls into this a little bit, is it tries to do too much.
Right.
And I think, and this happens to a lot of software products too. Like, you buy a software product to do one thing, and before you know, it's trying to turn something into a subscription, and then you can sell stuff on it. And you're just like, I don't want it to do that. I just want it to send an email. I don't care about anything. And so same thing with these tools. Like, it's like, hey, we'll do this, and we'll also do this, and we'll do this. Like, I don't want it to do 20,000 things. I just want it to do one thing really, really well. And that's what I like here, is that I feel like I can use detect for static analysis, and then I can use ktfmt for my formatting of my code. And that's all I have to worry about. If I need it to format, it does that really, really well. Is that kind of what you found in your experience? Because I haven't used it.
It is. It's very similar. There are some caveats because as I was integrating it, I realized there were some things I needed to do for my teams, especially when you work with more than one person, right? Because in the open source repo, it's easy because it's mostly just me maintaining with a bunch of other folks helping. But when you use this in an actual environment where you're building an app together as a team, then there are some caveats that you have to keep an eye out for. And yeah, I thought I could talk about some of those things here.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's hop right into it, man, because you've had some more experience than I do, and it's something I want to learn more about.
So with ktfmt, right, like there's one thing, getting it to work with IntelliJ is there's ways to do it, right? Facebook released an IntelliJ plugin called ktfmt, I think. So, again, that's something you can go to the plugins marketplace, search for ktfmt, and it should pretty much show up as like the first result. And I would suggest people install that. Now, what that does is it only takes, and I think this is more like an IntelliJ, idiosyncrasy. Like the reason it does that is because I think that's all that's allowed from IntelliJ is, how if you hit format code, Command Option L or, Control Alt L if you're on a Windows user, it takes care of that piece. So you can basically say, hey, ktfmt, take over, the sort of formatting of it. But it doesn't auto format as you write the code, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to hit that Command Option L with this plugin. So that's the first step, right? ktfmt itself comes down as a downloadable jar. Like, so you can, you can basically run it through your entire code base using command line, and that works too. So it's like a multi-pronged approach that I did for my team because, I wanted to make it as easy as possible so people don't have to think about it, right? Like you just go forward, like you keep writing the code, and then when you see the MR up, it's just magically formatted. So that was my goal, right? Like I didn't want people to like think about making sure they did this, or they ran it first before committing the code, because then that defeats the purpose, right? I want it to be as seamless as possible, which is why that ktfmt plugin from IntelliJ alone wouldn't suffice, right? Because you could forget, commit the code, it would go up, and then, it would not be formatted in the standard way. Mm-hmm. Right. So step one is the plugin. Step two is this downloadable jar. I packaged it into like a pre-commit Git hook.
I was gonna talk about that. That's got to be something you can do. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of it. Which I'm not the biggest fan of pre-commit hooks because because you have to be a little careful. Like with, as they say, with a lot of power. With
a lot of responsibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Spider-Man quote. You can throw in a whole bunch of checks into your pre-commit hook, but then it starts slowing your commit down, and that gets really annoying. At least I'm like someone who's super annoyed if, my commit takes like a few seconds. So you have to be careful. But I mean, if folks are interested, like, yeah, ping me and I can like send you the pre-commit I use, but we basically diff the lines. So we only run it on the diff. So if we notice that something has changed in your file, in your source code,
yeah,
only then do we run the, not only then, but we run it only across the diff, which is like a good way to sort of contain, the scope of how much is being formatted by ktfmt.
Have you thought about, this is a little bit different because it's hard to tell. I guess ktfmt depends on the error code it returns or the code that returns on its exit. But I'm wondering if you could put it in a pre-push hook where then you don't even have to worrying about doing the commit, and then you just, when you push, it might, if it errors, says, hey, these 12 files are, need to be formatted.
Yeah, I think that's also possible. Like feel
I'm just throwing it out there.
That's a good point. How would that work? I've not used pre-push hooks before. How would that work? Would it change your existing commit? Like because say I commit over the course of 3 days locally, and then I push, does it just make a new one that formats it as a new commit?
That's what I think would happen is and again, this is completely, I don't even know anything about what ktfmt does. And I think the last time I wrote a pre-push was about a year ago. But if I remember correctly, whatever the executable is inside of the pre-push, it needs to have a non-error exit code, which I think is usually 0, I think. If it exits with 0, it means, hey, everything's good. But if it exits with anything else, then it means it's not good. So I don't know if ktfmt, how its exit codes look. So if you were to run it, I guess you could say, you could give it a diff and say, hey, do any of these need to be formatted? And I don't know if it would. I guess I'm not sure if this would even work or not, to tell you the truth now.
Well, no, I think I wonder, because it might fail saying like, hey, yeah, it's not.
That's what I want to do. I don't want it to push. I actually have this inside of a JavaScript project, but I run some JavaScript linter on it, on some other stuff, and I do it on a pre-push because I kept breaking the build because the build would break because of the linter, or the format would be wrong. And I'd be like, after like 4 minutes of a build.
It's the worst feeling in the world, by the way.
And so I just put it in my pre-push, and it would take an extra 10, 20 seconds to do, but I was okay with that because I could wait 10, 20 seconds now and not be notified 12 minutes later that I broke the build. I'm like,
No, that's a fair point. I think pre-push is a much better opportunity to catch it because, you don't push as often probably as you commit, right? Or maybe some do, but yeah, I would rather have all of that be slowed down in my push versus because you're anyway waiting for the networking IO, right? So at that point, you might as well just wait. So maybe I should look into the pre-push. The advantage with the pre-commit is as you commit the code, so like, I give it a commit message, the code that you see is already KD formatted as opposed to like, one more commit that follows up that just does the formatting, which I feel might happen if you catch it a little later. So that's the advantage, I think, with the pre-commit hook. But I should look into this, the pre-push aspect of it.
Oh, what do we do? I'm looking at my code right now. I just ran for that JavaScript project. We had everything kind of bundled up into a build command, and I would just run the build locally, and it would take 20, 30 seconds because it was a very fast project. And it would just build the JavaScript project. And if anything failed, it would fail in the build. And then I'd see, I'm like, so if the build didn't succeed, I couldn't push it up.
I see. Okay. So it is like a blocker, which is, that's good. And I can follow up. There's this tool called Spotless, which is what, we use to also do that. But, that's the multi-pronged approach.
Well, I think that's a good segue. So what is Spotless?
So Spotless is a CI plugin. So the idea with Spotless is it's not specific to Android, code bases or even Java or like Kotlin code bases. It's this tool that someone came up with that basically has handy plugins to hook into existing build systems. So you could use Spotless to basically say, hey, Spotless, I think is Spotless meaning like, the code is clean. Therefore, it's a play on that. So Spotless will make sure that all code formatting is taken care of. But the idea is you could plug in different formatters for different languages. So you could say, hey, for all my Kotlin code, or my KTS code and all of that, use this formatter. And you can actually, a lot of the examples you see use KDLint because KDLint is more popular, but I wanted ktfmt, right? And of course, there's also there's also a plugin for that. So I say, hey, for my Kotlin code, use ktfmt, right? For my Java code, use Google Java format. For my Ruby code, you can use I forget the
Rubocop or whatever.
Rubocop. Actually, you're right. I think Rubocop is the Ruby code formatter. So that's the advantage with Spotless. And the thing that makes it that much more better for us as Android users is it hooks really well to Gradle, which is what we need, right? So you can literally, add a Gradle plugin, and it's super straightforward. Like if folks are curious, again, just hit me up. I can it'll go on a tweet or or tweet or whatever. It's that sort of small. You add that to your repo and you point it to your KD format executable or something, or actually I think you can point, if the plugin makes it easy to say, I want to use KD format version X, and it takes care of downloading it, running it across. So that's the, other prong, which is, if someone mistakenly for some reason didn't have this tooling installed on their local machine, if they didn't have the pre-commit hook or the sort of formatting, if they were not diligent to do it manually, you can add a CI check in your Android code base that would basically fail if you didn't send it. And actually, the approach that you said with the push, you can also do this. By the way, I know there's some folks. What they do is in GitHub Actions, they have a post CI check. So they take the code, they actually run it because the Gradle plugin has both a check and it's Spotless check and Spotless apply are the two Gradle tasks or the commands, right? So Spotless apply basically says, just format it, go through the entire thing and just format all the files that don't follow the KD formatting or code style. So that's the third approach, which is you also want to add a CI plugin to make sure that all your code is formatted correctly. And this is really valuable in the early stages. When I found it, because when I'm trying to move my teams, there's obviously some folks who are on vacation or who missed the formatting sort of announcements. this is great for those because they'll commit it one day and they're like, wait, why is my build failing? It's like, oh, your formatting's off. Why is my formatting off? Oh, yeah, I forgot to get ktfmt installed and, do all that jazz. So that is another approach that definitely is useful that I think a lot of people would want to leverage.
I think it's there's probably a whole episode we could do on this, but in my opinion, it's very important to have these steps automated in some type of CI environment where the build will fail if you don't have or meet certain formatting. Some people who are hearing this are going to be rolling their eyes and like, who cares about this? And I get it. If you're working on your project alone, you probably don't need this. Like, okay, it's just, you're writing code for yourself. It's not a big deal. But as soon as you enter a team environment, there's different opinions they're going to have. And someone likes to put the parameters all in one line. Someone likes to put them all on different lines or 3 on a line. I don't know, whatever. But having a tool like this allows that tool to be, the judge and the jury and say, hey, no, this is not okay, or this is okay. And since it's automated, as humans, we're going to forget, and pushing this up to an automated environment like a CI server, if it's on GitHub or whatever, is going to make a humongous improvement in your code quality across your team, because it's just going to make sense over time as you open a file you haven't been in for 6 to 12 months, that it's formatted correctly and it's not some weird random file. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm sure you've opened a random file that hasn't been open for 3 or 4 years and you're like, what is this mess?
For sure.
Who did that? Git annotate, and you're like, oh, it was me.
It's usually how it ends up being, right? Yeah, no. So this check is great for that reason. I think you captured it really well. You want to make sure that you have some sort of consistency in the way it's sort of maintained.
Have you found anything that you didn't really like about it, or did you run into any hiccups during when you kind of got first set up with this, or did you remember any challenges at all?
Yeah, no, there's definitely some, and it depends on your tolerance. So one thing with the pre-commit hook that I realized, and I actually haven't completely found a solution for this yet, is I think IntelliJ. So if you have and I have this problem mostly in the app, some of the bigger apps that I work on. If you have a mono repo, one of the problems is your git commit hook is going to be in a different directory than your app. Again, it depends on how your mono repo is structured. And so one of the, it's a funny issue because I didn't realize it. Typically when, the mono repo, if you have a big mono repo, you have your web app, your Android app, your iOS app. It depends on how your mono repo is structured. But one of the mono repos we have here is it has the entire code base for a portion of our company.
Mm-hmm.
The Android app happens to be in one of the folders, nested folders in this mono repo directory.
Okay.
The problem with IntelliJ is when I open up IntelliJ, I don't open the mono repo. I open just my directory, right? And when you open your IntelliJ directory, what happens is it doesn't see the pre-commit hooks because that's in the parent.git directory.
Yes.
So what would happen is people would commit and they're like, I didn't have any issue committing. And I'm like, that is not possible. There's a pre-commit hook. How are you doing this? But that's because I'm more loaded and I always just use CLI. I don't use IntelliJ to actually commit my code. And so that was one of the catches that I realized. I'm like, that's tricky. I haven't figured out a solution. Most of the engineers I work with usually are like, oh, okay, we get it. And they just format it. Or now the CI check captures it. So the few times they manage to commit, it just, takes care of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't found a solution for, again, if you don't use a mono repo and your Android app is the Git parent directory, you probably won't run into this problem because IntelliJ will pick up the commit hooks if it sees them,
Mm-hmm.
So that was one oddity that I noticed in practical use when I actually used this script.
Okay. That doesn't sound like it's too difficult. I wonder how many people actually use mono repos. Do you find a lot are using them out there?
It's a mixed bag, honestly. I've seen both sides. I've seen enough, so it's almost a 50-50.
Really? I haven't seen it at all. That's why I asked.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think what's changed is because the build systems are different these days, because I don't know if you've noticed, but most people are either switching to Buck or something else. And the Android folks obviously stick to Gradle because it's what's recommended, and it goes back to if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So a lot of especially with modularization and stuff, Gradle builds can be pretty fast, and the caching that's introduced these days. So I've found that a lot of where there's, where the build system is different, people have started to break away from the monorepo.
Mm-hmm.
But larger companies who basically have a single monorepo and they like, searching across the code base and that kind of stuff, they use Buck as their single build system. And in those cases, I've seen monorepos used.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's another topic for another day. So
I know. Yeah, that's definitely going to spawn into another topic. The other thing I noticed is when in IntelliJ, again, when you're typing your code, right?
Yeah.
IntelliJ now has like a lot of settings, right? And there is this thing called the editor config, the .editor config, because IntelliJ in itself has a code style setting, right? And you can import a code style setting. Typically, people have IntelliJ code style setting, so you could use that. If you use the KD formatter plugin, there is an option to say, hey, respect my editor config. So you can, in your directory, add a .editor config file.
Okay.
That can specify. So what KD format does is they distribute an editor config file. This only applies for one case. This is when I'm actually typing the code. If I wanted to just automatically be formatted in the KD format style, that's when the editor config comes in. Does that make sense?
I don't know. Can you maybe explain it a different way?
Yeah, I need to explain it differently. So with the KD format plugin that I talked about, the first step, right? When you hit Command Option L, that does it after the fact. So I'm in my editor window. I type a whole bunch of code as I just think through it. No formatting, right? I hit Command Option L, it gets formatted. But what if as I type the code, I wanted IntelliJ to just make sure that my indentation, all of those follow KD format?
Oh, just automatically, right?
Yeah, just automatically. So you don't have to hit Command Option L. But as I'm typing my for loop, I hit my open braces and I hit enter and I hit tab.
It usually goes to the right place, whatever.
Yeah. So if you want that to automatically be formatted, that actually is not respected by the plugin. The KD format plugin is not able to do that. The only thing that controls that when you're inside the editor window is IntelliJ's code style.
Oh.
Yeah, which is just one of those weird things, right? So, but what you can do with IntelliJ is now there's this more distributable format, right? This .editor config.
That's the editor config. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is like this cross-platform way that most IDEs are starting to follow. So you can have an editor config, you can open VS Code, and it would still follow the same code style formatting. So KD format also distributes this editor config file that you can use. So you can say, hey, I want to use this editor config that follows KD format with the set of standard settings.
Oh, that's pretty sweet then. So you just get that right out of the box and it's supported by the IDE then.
Yes, it is. But here's the caveat. I know. Yeah, exactly. There's that but coming. Editor config is not able to handle all the permutations that KD format follows. So it's not 100% match, if that makes sense. So you'll get close, but it won't be 100% match.
It's going to give you probably the most common or the most.
Exactly. There's some things that it just cannot accommodate, because it wasn't meant to handle specific languages. It was meant more as a general coding sort of code style configurator. So that was another thing. And again, if you want IntelliJ to follow your editor config, it's an option you have to pick. So you should ask IntelliJ, hey, follow my editor config, and ignore the code style that comes built in, right? So that's another caveat. So again, a lot of these things, it's like, oh, you can do this and this and this, and together the picture becomes really good once you bring them all together.
Yeah.
So what I actually did for my team is I wrote like a very basic shell script that would just do everything, right? Because with IntelliJ and stuff, you can change your XMLs, like you can do all of that in your workspace and check that in so that people all have the right thing. So when I went and told my team, hey, we want to start using this, all they had to do to set it all up is, for the most part, run the shell script, and it would just take care of most things.
Put all the files in the right locations and go from there.
Exactly. The pre-commit hooks are in the right place. It downloads the right version of KD format. It replaces your code style with the right one from KD format. It adds the editor config file in the right place. So because you can manually do all of these things, but it just is that much more cumbersome for people who have to do it or don't listen to this episode. So you can just run the shell script and say, okay, go for it, and just like go on with your life, and things will just happen the right way. So I would recommend people do something like that, because there isn't like a one-stop solution to say, just like install this thing and then you're done.
Which kind of brings up a good question that I had for you is, do you have any advice for people that are listening to this that say, hey, this is interesting, this is something I want to do for my team? How can they go about introducing this to their team without getting too much pushback? Or what do they do if they get some type of pushback in regards to this? Do you have any advice for that?
I mean, discuss it with your team, right? Because this is very opinionated. So, you don't just introduce it and say, hey, guys, we're using, because here's the other caveat, right? ktfmt chose 2 spaces, I guess, as against 4 spaces for their indentation, which can be a little, and because it's an opinionated formatter, they don't want to necessarily change that. They have, by the way, because I think you can add a flag called Dropbox style. I'm presuming maybe Dropbox was also using, and they pushed Facebook or Meta to sort of add this configuration. I don't know what the story is behind there, but that'll change it to 4 spaces, right? And I think typically Kotlin, from the JetBrains folks, they recommend 4 spaces, if I recall correctly. So you have those conversations. By the way, my push, like personally, what I told my team was like, look, I just want this tool to work. I really don't care if it's 2 spaces or 4 spaces. I just want it to be consistent. And it goes back to my philosophy, which is like, just try to use the tool. And I think this is something you told me in the early days. Try to use the tool to as vanilla a version as possible, right? Because the more you try to customize, the more you try to jigger with the tool, you have to introduce those layers in every other place that you use this, right? So,
and this goes for like that saying goes for everything across software that I'm realizing now that I'm a couple of decades in. This goes for if you're building an Android application and you're going to use some crazy library that has its own custom activities and does some fancy stuff. Sure, you can use that. But what ends up happening when some new app compat update comes out that gives you a brand new feature, but you can't use it until your library updates, and now you're stuck. It's like, all right, is there a way that I could do the same exact thing, but depend upon the vanilla libraries to do what I need to do, and then maybe add or mix some stuff in through some extension methods or whatever? And the same goes for other languages. This is the same thing that I've written Ruby apps for 10 plus years now, Rails apps. And for the longest time, I would go down some crazy rabbit hole of using some crazy test framework and blah, blah, blah. And then I'd run into a wall somewhere. And then eventually, I'd say about 5 to 7 years ago, I just said, you know what? From here on out, I'm just doing everything vanilla. And I've done the same with JavaScript projects. And every time it's paid off. And every time I've deviated from that rule, it's always come back to bite me in every technology I've dealt with, because there's always something that pops up because I didn't stay with the vanilla.
No, 100%. That rule applies. I think that's wisdom that it's funny because I remember, even if people go back to these early episodes, I'm the kind of person who loves tweaking things, right?
Yes, you do.
Donn knows better than anyone else. And I think that's just wisdom that you get as you sort of either get older or you get more sort of wise. Just don't mess with tools. Like, especially if something's working, just keep it like, for that one tiny, ask yourself the question how much you care about that. If you don't, and more often than not, just let it go and use the tool as is. Anyway,
it's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the same topic, it's funny I think about this because I was doing some work recently, and a bunch of the staff engineers on this project that I'm on, there's a team, it's like 40, 50 Android engineers, and we were having to upgrade some tooling, and they sent out a report and said, all right, hey, by the way, everybody needs to be on this new whatever version of Android Studio by this date because of XYZ. And it says, here's where everybody is at. Here's where we currently stand with numbers. And then down at the bottom, there's like the last supported version of Android Studio, which is really stable. And literally almost all of the staff engineers are still on that version. Like nobody wants to move. It's like, it works. I don't want to break it. I just want to do my work.
No, you're right. There's something there, right? Like there's absolutely some knowledge and wisdom in that saying, which is like, keep it as close to, the intended use as possible.
Yeah.
It also goes back to, again, the architecture stuff. Like there's a bunch of really good libraries and frameworks out there, right? But personally, I've the version of the architecture, the unit directional stateflow architecture I chose was like, how can I make this work with the vanilla components we get from Android? Like if I have to use the standard view model, I'm just going to use the view model. I do not want to add my own layer on top of it for very similar reasons. I just want if app compat changes or something changes, I don't want to have to rejigger or make that many changes. If Anvil or Dagger or something changes, I don't want to have to rethink my entire architecture, right? So
yeah, it goes back into so many different aspects of software development. And like you said, over time, you just start realizing that you'll encounter that pain eventually. And then you start realizing, all right, can we just leave all that stuff alone and we'll just kind of bolt it on kind of?
Right. So yeah, that's ktfmt. If folks have more questions, send it our way. I'm very happy with the setup that we have. There are obviously some of the caveats. Eventually, the thing I like the most, Donn, is if I review code, I don't have to think about this anymore.
Yeah, that's key.
As the other way is to go all zen on this and say don't care about it, but that's not true. When you see a file that's indented both with 2 spaces and 4 spaces in the same file, that's going to drive I don't know, it would
my eyes bleed.
Right. So those are the kinds of times where you're I just wish there was something that would just do it. And now people don't even have to think about it. It's it would be nice if you indented this better. I'm well, I don't get a choice because that's what KT format does. It just takes care of it. It just makes it so much more easier, and you can focus on the actual code.
And that's it. You touch on something there that I think is important that a lot of people don't really realize, is that at the end of the day, we only have so much energy in our head, and there's only so many decisions we can make throughout our day. And decision fatigue is a real thing. And this is just another thing that I can remove off of my decision-making responsibilities day to day. I can let the computer do it. I've already decided, hey, that's good enough. It looks great. It works. Cool. I'll let the computer take it over. I'm not going to argue with it. I have other more important fish to fry, and I'm going to go worry about those things.
100%. Couldn't have been said better. I feel that just captures it all. That mental bandwidth, I want to save it for the important things.
Yeah, 100%.
Perfect. That was, I encourage you to try it. You should try it, Donn, and let me know what you think about it.
I've already installed it. While we were sitting here, I installed it. It's all right, cool. I really want to use this now because it's something that key combination in IntelliJ is something that is second nature to me, like saving a file.
Yeah, that was it. Oddly enough, that's why I started with it. That was one of the most attractive features of KT format, which is oh, you have an IntelliJ plugin that makes it work. That I'm that's because you're right. That Command Option L is just sometimes I don't even think about it, and I keep hitting it as I'm thinking.
Yeah, I opened up some of the stuff that I worked on from Jumpstart Android, and let me see how that looks. And I just opened up a random file, and it already reformatted, 10, 20 lines. I'm oh, I didn't even know I had an issue right there. And it's it wasn't, I can't say it's a big issue, but maybe where the line broke was incorrect, or it wasn't a space after a colon or before a colon or something like that. But it's it just cleans it up even more, it's kind of the polish that you need to just have a good, clean code base. Yeah.
And if you go to the KT format website, right, we'll add the link there. They also show examples where this is what it would otherwise be formatted as. And here we are taking a creative license to make it look more sane. So they have some good examples on the website too.
That's what really sold me there. Seeing the website, it's hey, this is before KT format. This is with KT lint. This is with something else. It's oh, and here's it is with KT format. It's oh, I really like that one a lot better.
There we go.
Cool.
All right, Donn. If folks want to find out your adventures and what do you think about it after you've tried it a little bit more, what's a good way to do that?
Best way to do that is to follow me on Twitter. Been a little quiet recently, but that's just because I've been working on a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll have a lot to say here very soon. So follow me over on Twitter at Donn Felker. And if folks want to see what you're up to and learn about all your new stuff that you're working on and everything that you're tinkering with, as always, how can they do that, Kaushik?
Twitter is a good place. Again, I'm Kaushik Gopal. I'm also on Mastodon now. So, it's the new hotness that kids are following these days. So I'm on Mastodon and, a bunch of other places. So yeah, you can reach me out there.
Cool.
All right, Donn. Nice chatting with you. We will catch folks in the next episode.
See ya. Once again, this episode is brought to you by androidjobs.io. Post a free job posting, sign up to get notified of those job postings. And you can also upgrade and make your job posting highlighted or pinned to the top or anything like that. And remember, all job postings are now 90 days long. So check it out, androidjobs.io. Thanks for listening.
That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Don Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.